Okay, we got a video here about some election results of local races in Washington State and why they matter to you. Okay, we're back in Washington State. My name is Glenn Morgan. Thank you for watching. This is We the Governed. And I do want to point out that we are under Inslee's eternal lockdown and emergency orders that never seem to end after a couple years. But it is important to realize that nothing I say in this video has been approved by Inslee's Ministry of COVID Compliance. That being said, since I'm primarily just talking about elections, I don't really plan on talking about much related to COVID-19 or the pandemic, but it's important that I put that disclaimer as a trigger warning for those who only want to watch things that have been approved by the Ministry of COVID Compliance. So let's talk about the election results, and more specifically, just a couple of specific ones that are out there in the state. I cover these election results because even though you may not live in these communities or these towns, what happens there never stays there. If good people get elected to office or bad people, oftentimes that's your farm team to run for higher office. So you want to know who they are, even if that's not where you live. Secondly, if they institute some terrible policy, it's worth paying attention to it, because if it's a disaster there, it's probably going to be a disaster where you live too. And all bad ideas spread faster than the coronavirus. So the last thing we want is to have bad public policy out there, especially socialist anti-freedom policy, which seems to be dominant on one side of the political spectrum right now. So let's go into a couple of these races that at least I found interesting. And I do want to point out a little caveat, because we always have to do this with Washington state elections, because we are an all mail-in ballot state where basically we are stuck at the whims and the competency of the U.S. Post Office. We don't know when the rest of the ballots are going to get here or how many of them will actually find their final spot. And we don't know how many the election workers in King County may find in the trunks of their cars. So those little impacts of different batches of ballots trickling in over the next couple weeks could have an impact on the outcome. That being said, these races that we're going to talk about seem to be mostly finalized. So let's go to Eastern Washington, middle of the state, Moses Lake School District. The reason why I'm talking about this race is that I did an article earlier, and so I was kind of paying attention to what was going on here. This had to do with an incumbent, Vicki Melcher, who's the president of the school board there, and it does look like she has lost that position to newcomer, Mr. Hill, who's ran and did pretty well so far. He's not entirely out of the woods yet, but it looks like he's leading and probably in pretty good shape. The reason why this race stands out to me was because of this scandal that came out earlier where Superintendent Josh Meek really was a weight on this race, and I think landed on it and made kind of an impact in these results, because he was caught stealing money from the school district and essentially from the kids of the school district. It was just bizarre. Wrote an article about it. I have that link down below. And Vicki Melcher, this incumbent school board president who was friends with the superintendent, decided to give him a special going away settlement that was ridiculous. After you catch somebody like that stealing money and taking money from the school district, you fire them for cause. You don't just give them a big wad of cash on the way out the door. Anyway, because of that, in addition to this race result here, I'm going to point out that it looks like the levy is too close to tell. And the levy is the school district asking for additional funds from the local community. This story went out far and wide on just the misuse and abuse of the funds and the incompetence of the superintendent, plus CRT issues were relevant there as well, critical race theory. So I'm not sure that this levy is going to pass. And most of these levies usually pass pretty easily. So the fact that they lost the levy when they tried to put it in the primary and now it doesn't look good on election night, still too close to call. But it is a direct result of this scandal, and clearly these people need to be held accountable, and it looks like Hill, as the challenger, is going to have to be a part of this changing situation in the Moses Lake School District. So we'll see how that goes. If we go clear back across the state out to Puget Sound and the islands, San Juan Islands, the beautiful San Juan Islands, we did an article there earlier about former disgraced Senator Kevin Ranker, who, after his Me Too moment and getting in trouble for sexually harassing lobbyists and others in Olympia, came back to Orcas Island as a disgraced former legislator. And like all disgraced former legislators, they can't seem to stay away from the political process. And so as a former state senator, he wanted to jump in and become in charge of the Charter Review Commission. I'm going to point out, there was a video that went a little viral in the islands of him basically saying that the voters of San Juan County were so stupid that he could literally take a cow, paint it blue, call it a climate czar, and that guy would be elected. And and they would vote for it. And this arrogance in how he approached and monopolized this charter review process in San Juan County was very notable. I did an article about it. I mean, this was clearly this disgraced former state senator, Kevin Ranker, coming out trying to take over the local islands with an arrogance and a total lack of concern as to whether he was actually helping anybody who lived there other than some grant grifting operations or self-serving plans that he might have had. And as we see, that didn't work out quite as well for him. And now these are pretty dramatic results because what you're really seeing here is 4 of the 6 proposals that Ranker made, his blue cows, looks like they're failing, and they're going to fail miserably. And this is significant because San Juan County is a very dominant left-leaning county. I mean, it's probably the most left-leaning county of all of Washington State. It doesn't have a huge population, about 15,000 people, but nevertheless, to see this kind of a result there, and especially when the local citizens really didn't wake up to some of these issues until just a few weeks ago. And so although you had a kind of a grassroots movement of local citizens who were opposing them, to have 4 of them fail so quickly, and the fact one of them's right on the bubble, we can't tell how it's going to go, and the 2 that seem to possibly be, that it's possible they'll pass, are the 2 that are the least impactful. One's a modified term limits, another one's just a cut and paste to the state's non-discrimination clause largely. I mean, it's kind of silly, but nevertheless, this is a good example of how the established elites have a certain plan for you, and that doesn't mean that's how the voter's going to go when it actually hits the ballot box. The other place then, going back clear across the state to the city of Prosser, this is really following up on an article that I did out there. You really had 2 people here. Neither one of them is great, actually, for political office, but they're running against each other. And you had incumbent Morgan Everett, no relation to me, but a guy that's in office right now is mostly a placeholder. He's been in there for a while. I'm not sure that he does anything significant or has accomplished anything in office, but the one thing he didn't do is run a campaign. This guy was lazy and did not file his paperwork with the PDC. I did promise people in my last article I'd file a complaint against him, which I will do, but despite that, despite his problems, the guy was being run, challenged by Maricela Sanchez. And so I kind of wrote about this in the article because as much as him winning isn't so much a victory in itself, it was better to have him win and keep out this gal who was basically just a hardcore green, really part of the gangrene environment that was represented most clearly by Futurewise, which is a real nasty organization that has done a lot to destroy local communities all around Washington State. She sits on their board. And she sat on their board at least since the last time when she was arrested out in North Dakota, attempting to threaten or shut down an attack. It had to do with threatening with explosives and fire, was why she was arrested originally at a protest out there in North Dakota. So even though they eventually dropped those charges when all these attorneys came in and had a big fight, what's interesting is that this is not the kind of person who would be good for the city of Prosser. However, she was great at campaigning. I mean, certainly better than this guy, Morgan. And she raised a lot of money, filed her paperwork mostly semi-correct, and was running a real campaign, unlike him. And it really looked like with the elites kind of lining up behind her that she'd be the one who would win the race. And the fact that he won, even though he was in an empty suit and kind of concealed himself from the public, is shocking in itself, and that's kind of a big deal, I think. And I really attribute that mostly to people in that community waking up to these aren't the kind of people you want to get in office if you care about property rights or freedom moving forward. So that was an interesting race from my perspective and worth covering. A race that I should have covered, I wish I'd written an article about it. I'm kind of feeling guilty about it right now because the city of Tenino is just down the road from where I live. I love this town. It's a little city. I don't live there. I live outside of the city in the rural area, but it's just a small town, most famous for being the end of the Oregon Trail and wooden money, which they recently brought out during the pandemic last year, but which had also been something that they had done back in the Depression in the 30s, so it was kind of well known for that. Anyway, there was a city council race, and as you can see from the results, incumbent John O'Callahan won, and this was important because I've been a friend of John's for a long time, and he was being challenged by Eric Miller, and Eric Miller was really a guy that just came down from Olympia, moved some family members down, and then they tried to sweep the city council in the city of Tenino, and bringing Olympia and Antifa values into the small town down the road wasn't a good fit, and it had the potential to really cause great harm in the city of Tenino. As you see from these results, and I want to point this out here, look at how few people actually voted overall, and yet how significant those votes are and how much they count. So in these small towns, it's very easy to get apathetic and not necessarily pay attention attention to how much your vote really does count, and how important it is that you pick somebody who is going to represent the people of Tenino, in this case, versus the big city from Olympia. And again, Eric Miller was in big favor of a lot of grant grifting operations up in Olympia, and he wanted to bring these terrible ideas down to Tenino. Again, nothing stays static. So whatever's happening in a town or a city is going to spread to the surrounding community unless you get in there and get involved and stop it, or if it's a good idea, then you get there and you spread it yourself. Regardless, John grew up in, or has lived in Tenino a long time, and so it's just good to see him get reelected. And I'm kind of feeling guilty for not even writing an article about it over the last few months. I should have. But maybe a post-election article more detailing kind of the drama in Tenino is going to be worth having out there. And again, it's just the city of Tenino saved itself, and we'll just see how things go in the future. We are going to have some more articles and more videos about the election results around the state. Most of these election results really get ignored, and yet they really are impactful. They do matter. I always consider them kind of quiet echoes of what's going to happen in the future, and these decisions now reverberate through the future, and whatever happens in that community or town far away, it oftentimes comes to your front door before you know it. So go to wethegovern.com if you want to learn more. Don't forget to subscribe, share this video with others, and again, for those who say your vote doesn't count, you're wrong. Look at the recent results. Your vote does count. Sure, there's problems in the election process, but the reality is that those problems aren't going to go away because you don't vote. You need to vote, stay engaged. We'll keep working on fixing some of these problems in the election process and making a difference with who we put into office. So with that, and that's why I always end these videos, the future belongs to those who show up.